get straight into our lesson. So guys, we're going to do a little bit of decimals to start off with. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Decimals is not something that really follows us into grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. Most of the time, we always want to work with fractions. Fractions are just easier. They are more accurate. Sometimes our decimals are really gross and they've got like all these long recurring numbers that just have no pattern to them. So we often don't work with decimals. However, it is important for us to be able to understand what decimal we are working with when being given a fraction. So we're just going to go through the basics here. You'll probably do slightly more at school, but you'll have the basics as a result of this lesson. So hopefully at least decimals we're slightly more comfortable with. So basically what we're wanting to have a look at here is we're wanting to have a look at all of these fractions that I've given us and essentially how do we write the fraction as a decimal answer. Right, so what we need to bear in mind is that especially when we're dividing by 10 or timesing by 10 or any multiple of 10, there's often special rules that apply, and this specifically applies with our decimal places. So what I mean by that is, if we just ignore the division for a second and we think about multiplication, if we think about 3 times 10, essentially what I'm doing is I'm adding a 0 to the 30 because 10 has 1 0. If I'm saying 3 times 100, I'm adding 2 zeros to 3 because 100 has 2 zeros. If I said 3 times 1,000, I would get 3,000. So I'm adding 3 zeros to my 3 or my whole number because that's how many zeros 1,000 has. And we could keep going all the way up to trillion if we really felt that way. But the point is, when I am multiplying, firstly, my numbers are getting bigger. And secondly, I keep adding a unit to my number. And so if we think about, let's say, for example, this first example that I gave us of 30 times 10, my decimal point was originally after the 3. It was 3,0. And then we had a situation where we had 30. So my decimal point moved 1 unit to the right to now be, or to now represent 30. The same's happening here for the 3 times 100. My decimal point, your English, was originally straight after the 3. Now when we times it by 100, it moved 2 places to be after the 300. So every time I'm multiplying by 10, I'm moving my decimal to the right-hand side. So let's just make a note of that. When we times by 10, our decimal moves right. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because now when we start to divide by 10, the opposite is going to happen. So again, we've got a fraction of 3 divided by 10, but let's just think about what this means. We've discovered that there's a pattern or a pattern essentially to timesing by 10. What happens if I now divide it by 10? So 3 divided by 10, we are now moving our decimal the other way. So my decimal was originally after the 3. It now needs to move to the left. And so 3 divided by 10 is 0,3. I've got my decimal moving 1 place to the left, and this is now becoming a value less than 1. If I said 3 divided by 100, my decimal must now move 2 places to the left. And so now I've got 0,03. And so again, there's sort of this pattern that we see going on with our zeros, in that once again, a division by 10, I had 1 0 in front. A division by 100, I still had 2 zeros. If I did a division by 1,000, hopefully we realized we would have 3 zeros. So this would be 0,003. And so this is now sort of the logic that we need to use when we start to see how do we get from a fraction to a decimal. So I'm just going to make a little note here. When we divide by 10, ooh, why is it not writing? Let me try that again. Sorry, guys. When we divide by 10, our decimal now moves left. Who knows what's happening? Alrighty. So this is now what we need to start applying to converting fractions to decimals. So if we have a look at this first example here, essentially what we have is 3 divided by 10. I can take it out of its fraction format and I can replace the fraction with a division. And so we now know, because we've sort of investigated the pattern that we have going on, that 3 divided by 10 means that my decimal, which is currently sitting after the 3, must move 1 unit to the left. And so I now have an answer of 0,3. I've got 1 0 in front of the 3 because it corresponds to the 1 0 of the 10. And I can now write my fraction of 3 over 10 as 0,3. Now, you can also think of it as, oh, I've really taken up a whole lot of space here. We can also think of it diagrammatically. You obviously don't have to do this. I'm just trying to show you different ways to understand this. If we think about a pizza, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this very well. Nope, I can't draw a pizza. 1, 6. Okay, so there's my pizza. I've got 3 of the 10 parts. If we were to think of this as a percentage, I'm only considering 30% of my pizza. And so what we're actually stating here is that we've got equivalent forms of the same amount. 3 over 10 is the same thing in decimal form as 0,3, which is the same thing in percentage form as 30%. So fractions, decimals, and percentages work hand in hand with each other. Now, if the percentage thing confuses you, just ignore that, right? It might be helpful for some, it might not be helpful for others. But everything that we're doing in terms of fractions, decimals, and percentages, they do all go hand in hand. Alrighty, so I'm just going to stay here for a second in case anyone wants to take a screenshot of all of these notes. Please, can we not be rude to each other on the chat? You know how I feel about nonsense. I will just take you off. Let's either try help each other or not say anything at all. Bandili, I don't know if you can help me, but if you can hear me, but I'm going to try help you now while everyone's taking a screenshot.
I see you guys worked really hard. Did we understand this? Did we take screenshots? Let's make sure that we did take screenshots and we are all good to go. Well done, my people. I see you, Lisekanya. I see you, Ritumetse. Yana, yeah. See you. See you, Raj. I don't know if that's the way you call your name. I see you guys. Well done. If you understood these examples, we're going, guys. We're moving. Well done, my people.
Right, guys, let's have a look at another example. I hope everyone's got their screenshots. Screenshots? I don't know what I said. Sounds like screenshots.
Yeah, they did.
Alrighty, so let's have a look at this example here. We've got 27 over 100. Okay, so excuse me. Again, we need to use the same sort of thinking in terms of I'm now dividing by 100. This has 2 zeros. So according to the notes that we made or the little pattern that we saw happening, we know that we need to move this decimal. Now, again, what we can do is we can take this out of fraction form and write it with the division sign. It might make it a little bit easier to see what we need to move or how we need to move our decimal point. Now, remember, your decimal point is straight after the number. If there's no decimal in the number, it falls straight after the last number of the value you're working with. Now, we've got 2 zeros here. So that therefore means that I need to move 2 places to the left. Remember, whenever I divide, I move left. I'm just going to use L for left. And so what I now have is 0,27. Just to show you that again, my decimal moved 2 units left to now give us 0,27. Righty, so when we're converting these fractions to when we're converting these fractions to decimals, we always want to try and have a denominator that is a multiple of 10, because it does make our life a whole lot easier, especially if we're not allowed to use a calculator. If you are allowed to use a calculator, let me just show you how or what you would do. So if we've got 27 divided by 100, our calculator automatically gives us the fraction answer. That's automatic. But if you now go here and push this SD button, it allows you to convert it to a decimal. So if I push that button, it takes me to the decimal 0,27. Now, what that means is that you can always double check your answers. It means that once you've converted from a fraction to a decimal, you can quickly get your calculator, double check if you've done it correctly, and then move on. Right, so again, I'm going to wait here in case anyone wants to take a screenshot. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to raise your hand. Vandilia, I do see your hand, but it doesn't look like you have audio and you probably can't hear me as I'm saying this. So hopefully we can sort you out now. Any questions?
Yeah, I gave Bandile instructions on the chat directly, so I hope she's seeing that part. Because that's the only thing I can help with, and she hasn't responded.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm assuming there's no questions because there's no hands. I'm hoping we all have our screenshots.
Yeah, we can soldier on. We're moving on, my people.
So what I want you guys to try here is the 7 divided by 1,000. Write it as or with the division sign if you need to. Think about how many times you need to move the decimal point, and then pop your answers in the chat. I don't want to see any hands just yet. I first want answers in the chat. I'll ask for hands in a second or two, but give this one a try. So give question C a try here for me.
We see you, Fiona. We see you, Mivuyo. Let's go, guys. Everyone, answers on the chat, please. There we go, Lisakanya. Thank you, Ayabonga. Jamela, remember that everyone who is writing an answer down, write it on your book first so you can do corrections, okay? Bandile, I'm on it. I keep on replying on the private messages. I'm not sure if you're seeing it. Let's try this again. Well done, guys. Let's do it.
Guys, I see some decimals missing from some of your answers. And remember, a decimal is a comma. It is not a semicolon, and it's not a full stop. It's a comma, all right? And I know that there's other countries that do use a full stop, but in South Africa, we use a comma. Alrighty, would anyone like to raise their hand to tell us what their answer was when we said 7 divided by 1,000? Ryan, don't worry that you're late. Remember, everything is recorded so you can get it there. Io, what did you get?
Ma'am, I got 0 0.007.
Perfect. Well done. So we've got 0.007. Excellent. Guys, why do we have that? Well, we know in 1,000, there are 3 zeros. So we need to have 3 zeros sort of put into our answer. And we can go and do, or we can go and write this as division. So 7 divided by 1,000. Those 3 zeros are telling me to take my decimal and move it 1, 2, 3 places to the left. Now, when you do this, sorry, that was a bit weird looking. So 1 place, 2 place, 3 places, and we insert our comma. Every time we've now moved it, we put in a 0. And so that's how I know I've got my 3 zeros sort of in front of the 7, with the decimal in between the first and the second. So here, 7 over 1,000 is equal to 0.007. Again, if you wanted to double check on a calculator, there's 7 over 1,000. There, my calculator is giving me the fraction because it always does. I push SD, so that one there, and it tells me, got it in scientific notation. It will tell you that it's 0.007. I need to change the settings on my calculator. Apologies. Alrighty, so again, we always want to see if our denominator can become a multiple of 10. I forgot what number I was talking about. Alrighty, take your screenshots if you want. I'm going to remind you that if you are late, please go and watch the recording, or if you're late or if you get kicked out or have to come back in, please watch the recording. We can't go back to the beginning of the lesson to like catch anyone up. You just need to check the recordings. Hopefully, as we do more examples though, this will make sense. So Brian, we know where to put the decimal because I'm dividing by 1,000. I move my decimal 3 points back. And 3 points because 1,000 has 3 zeros. Alrighty, so let's have a look at slightly more complex questions. Now, these are, I say they're more complex, they're not really. We have learned about, because we've done our fraction section, we have learned about what we call equivalent fractions. Okay, so I'm just going to write that out for you. Brian, if you're still confused, just look at the examples as I go along. Hopefully it'll make sense. So guys, equivalent fractions, remember, are fractions that look different but mean the same thing. So for example, half means the same thing as 2 over 4, which means the same thing as 3 over 6, and I can keep going. Essentially, if I simplify 2 over 4 and 3 over 6, I get a half. They all represent half, okay? Now, this is essentially the idea that we want to use when we get fractions where the denominator isn't a multiple of 10. What we want to do is we want to try and make it a multiple of 10. Now, don't try and go crazy. Don't try and make this 1,000. There's no need for that. I've got a denominator of 5. Now, I need to just think carefully. Can I times 5 by something to either make it 10, 100, 1,000, etc., etc.? Well, I could do all of those things, but I don't want to get it all the way to 1,000. That's time consuming. I can say that I can make this an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10. And I know I can do that because if I times 5 by 2, I get a denominator of 10. Now, we know with equivalent fractions what we do to the bottom, we must do to the top. So I'm going to times 3 by 2 and get 6. And now because I've got that denominator of 10, this becomes easier. I've got 6 divided by 10. So Brian, listen up. I'm going to explain how we move this decimal. I have got 1 0 in the multiple 10. So only 1 0, which means I take the comma, which automatically sits right at the end of my number, and move it 1 unit to the left. And so now I've got 0, 6. My 1 0 is now in my decimal number. And so I've converted 3 over 5 to 0, 6. Now, what's quite nice is if you do want to check on your calculator, you don't need to type in 6 over 10. So here I've just typed in 3 over 5. It's given me 3 over 5, but I want to check what the decimal is. So I push that SD button and look at that, 0.6. So you can always double check on your calculator whether or not you've converted, excuse me, your fraction to a decimal correctly. You need to show you're working out, but you can always double check. All right, so take your screenshots. Brian, the 1 is not turning into a decimal. The 1 is just a placeholder. What we're doing is we're looking at how many zeros we have in order to move the decimal point. So if I'm dividing by 10 only, it's only got 1 0, so I move it 1. If I was dividing by 100, it's got 2 zeros, so I move the decimal twice. If I was dividing by 10,000, it's got 4 zeros, so I would move the decimal 4 times. So the 1 is just a placeholder. We don't need to do anything with that 1. We look at how many zeros our multiple of 10 has. Right, guys, let's have a look at another one. I hope you've all got your screenshots. Right, I want you to try B for me. So think about how you can make this denominator a multiple of 10. Now just think carefully. We obviously can't make 25 10. There's no way. 25 is already bigger than 10. Maybe we can make 25 into 100. So can I times 25 by something to make it a denominator of 100 to get an equivalent fraction? So give it a try. Pop your answers in the chat. We'll see how we go. And then once you have an answer, please, like I said, put it in the chat and then we can chat about what's happening in a second. Every now and then, if you just smack your calculator, it does what you need it to do. Again, guys, a decimal is a comma. It is not a semicolon. I don't want that. I just want a comma. A semicolon is what we do when we list numbers. We're not listing numbers. We're actually giving a value here. Nice. Does anyone want to raise their hand and explain to me how they got their answer? Nigel? You should, there we go.
There's 17 over 25, which will times 25 times 2 is 50, 17 times 3 times 2 is 34. So we'll say that 34 divided by 50. We say we move to the left with 1 decimal place because it is our 0 1 decimal. So say 1. It is 0.68. Our answer.
Okay, so just remember, we want our denominator to be a multiple of 10. 50 isn't a multiple of 10. It's 10, 100, 1,000. So you're on the right track here. What we want to do is we want to make this to a denominator of 100. And so if we've got a denominator of 100, I'm timesing 25 by 4, which means exactly as you said, I need to times 17 by the same amount. So I need to times 17 by 4. And that gives me 68. And so now what I have is 68 divided by 100. And because 100 has 2 decimal places, because 100 has 2 zeros, I take my comma that is automatically at the end of my number and I move it 1, 2 to the left. And so I've got an answer of 0, excuse me, 6, 8. If we have a look, the decimal moved from that was a bit of an aggressive highlighter. I do apologize. Let me try that again. The decimal has moved 2 places to correspond with those zeros. It went from after the 8, 1, 2. It moved 2 positions over to correspond with my 2 zeros. And so here, 17 over 25 represents 0.68 as a decimal. So the 8 is coming from, excuse me, 8 is coming from me multiplying the 17 by 4. Alrighty, Brian, I don't quite understand your question. If you can try and reword it. Otherwise, I'm going to open up to hands for questions now. So if you want to raise your hand, if anyone else has a question, you can raise your hand. If not, you're taking screenshots, and then we're going to take a little brain break.
I guess it's Brian's time. Hey, Brian, you can raise your hand and ask your question. The rest of us are either doing corrections or taking screenshots. But Brian, please ask that question again, because that looks like it's not even an equation, because 25 into 17 cannot equal to 0. So you can just explain a little bit better to Teacher Sam, so Teacher Sam can help us, okay? But you need to raise your hand so we can unmute you if you're still there. Hey, my people, this is important, okay? Because you need to know how to do it without a use of a calculator. And that's the important part. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm going to assume there's no questions. So let us jump to our brain break here. There we go. So guys, brain break. There we go. Remember, we want to work out the last equation's value. So this one down here. We're going to wait and see for the correct answer in the chat. And then once we see the correct answer, we'll call on you to give us what that answer is. Brian, I'm going to be honest, I still don't understand your question. 25 into 17 equals 0. It doesn't equal 0. And put a 0 at the 17 and a comma after the 0. We need to convert the denominator. Yeah, the denominator has to convert to a multiple of 10 if we're doing it without a calculator. So you need to make that 25 either 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, something like that.
Okay, let's try to figure out, my people, what's in there. Drums and guitars and microphones. Let's see if we can get it. That does not mean it equals to 0, Brian. Brian, I feel like maybe on Monday, you should come early, like to the class, like 5 minutes to, and then you can actually talk to Teacher Sam and I before class comes, so we can make sure that we are all in the same page, because what you just said now still does not make sense. Because if a number doesn't get inside another number, it doesn't mean that the answer is 0.
Okay, so how do I word this? So yeah, Brian, I think you need to try and join so that we can spend some time. But essentially, just because the denominator is bigger than the numerator doesn't mean it's 0. We can't divide it completely in, but we can put a portion of it in, which is why we end up with fractions, because it's just a portion or a part of the whole. And so, yeah, just because it's 17 divided by 25, it doesn't mean it's 0. It just means that it's a portion or a fraction of a whole. So join early on Monday, or try join early on Monday, and then we can have a chat. Guys, if you don't understand what you're doing, you're looking at the brain break, which is this thing over here. You are trying to work out the value of the microphones, guitars, and drums so that you can get the value of that final equation down at the bottom.
Step by step, my people. Bali, you must write your answer down first on the chart, and it should be the final answer. And if you get it right, we'll let you know and we can tell you to raise your hand. Okay. So let's go. I haven't even worked it out. Let's see. Oh, okay. It's a little bit faster.
I'm getting there. I'm just being very slow tonight. Okay, I haven't seen the correct answer yet.
Let's go, my people. Dun, 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 dun. Just be careful, okay, my people. When you're busy calculating, be careful. See that somewhere we have 2 mics, somewhere we have 1 guitar, somewhere we have 2 drums. So please take it into consideration when you're busy doing that. Brian, I think your case, we said that on Monday, it will help you if you can come earlier into class. Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah,
Nigel.
we have a winner. We have a winner in this house. Nigel, you can raise your hand. Nigel, well done. Nigel, raise their hand so you can tell the whole class how you got it. Nigel has the correct answer. There we go, Nigel. Explain to us, how did we arrive there? Well done.
Yeah, the first one is the 5 plus 5 plus 5. The first one is 5 plus 5 plus 5. It's
Good.
15.
Good.
5. Yeah, it's 15. The second one is 14 plus 14 times 10. It's 154. So the third one is 20. The third one is 20 plus 20 times 14 equals to 300. The fourth one, the third one will see where the one mic contains 5, and we have 2 drums. 2 drums contain 20, and we have 1 guitar. 1 guitar contains 7. So our answer will be 145. If we say 5 plus 20 times 7 is 145.
Good.
That's how we get our final answer.
Excellent. And guys, what's really important there is that we have to do BODMAS. So we have to do the multiplication first. So we have to do 20 times 7 first, which is 140. And then we only add the 5. So that's why Nigel has told us 145.
Well done, Nigel. Yay. Nailed it.
Okay, guys. So I'm going to have a look at 1 or 2 more examples just with the decimals, just because, oopsie. Sure. Just because I want you to be able to see, because I made a statement earlier about the fact that fractions, decimals, and percentages all work together. And so I want you to see why a percentage works together with our decimals and our fractions. So if we look at this, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing all of a sudden. If we look at 65%, what we need to remember is that a percentage basically means parts of 100. So percent represents 100, so this is parts of 100. And that's essentially what a percentage is. It's saying we have this many parts out of 100. So this 65% is saying that I've got 65 parts out of 100. And now this is a format hopefully we're comfortable with. We know that we are saying 65 divided by 100, And because I've got those, because I've got those 2 zeros, I know that I need to take the decimal that's at the end of the 65 and move it 1, 2 units left. And so my answer, as all of you are beautifully putting in the chat there, is 0.65. And so the point I want to make here is the fact that even if you have a percentage, you can always convert, or you can always write a percentage as a fraction over 100. And so what that means is that you can write it as a decimal. Right, so just to give you some practice, I think what I'm going to do is just give you like 2 quick questions and we're going to see how you go. So let's go. And right, so take your screenshots of that. What I'll actually do is just make this a touch smaller, and I'm causing absolute chaos because that's clearly my vibe today. Right, so screenshot of that, but there are your 2 questions that I want you all to try now. So the 2 questions are number 1 here and number 2 over there. I want them both converted to decimal numbers for me. And like Fiona's put there on the chat, number your answers as you put them in the chat. 1 equals, 2 equals, so that we know exactly which answer is which. So give those a try for me.
Let's go, my people. And Teacher Sam, is it okay if Brian raise his hand? So Brian, wherever you are, you must raise your hand so Teacher Sam can explain while others are doing these 2. Is Brian still here? There we go. The rest of us are doing number 1, number 2. When you're done, just label them. Number 1 equals to this. Number 2 equals to this. Let's go, my people. Brian, we are all yours. Ask your question.
So, as I was saying, can you go back to the previous question?
No, because everyone is busy doing this question, but I will write out the question for you. So the question was 17 over 25.
So you're gonna say 25 into 17. Which 25 can go into 17? You're gonna write a 0. So you're gonna put a comma because there's a remainder.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're gonna put a small 0 at the 17.
What, at the start?
At the end.
Okay.
You're gonna say 25 into 170.
Okay.
Which is equals to 6. So you're gonna put a 6 after the comma.
Okay. Okay, I do see where you're going with this. Because if you say 170 divided by 25, you get 6,8. And now you have added a 0, so you would have to take away that 0. So you'd have to move it to the left. So you would get 0,68. But what you need to bear in mind is that just because you got a 6 doesn't mean there isn't a remainder. So you always need to double check if there is a remainder to the division that you've done. And then remember that because you've added on that 0 over here, that technically means that you've multiplied by 10. So whatever whatever answer you get when you say 170 divided by 25, you need to undo the multiplication by 10 that you did, and you would need to divide by 10 so that you aren't changing the meaning of the fraction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I've never seen this method, so hence my confusion. It's fine. Just remember that you do have remainders and that you have changed the fraction by adding the 0. So just make sure you go back and change it back.
I can do the 3/5 correctly because it doesn't have a remainder.
Say that last part again.
I can do the 3/5 correctly because it doesn't have a remainder.
Yes, exactly.
So as I did here, you're gonna put the 0.6 on the 3/5. So you're gonna put a 0 on
Yeah,
just
but
to make it
remember
easy.
it's 0.68. So you have to remember there's an 8 there.
I'm
Because
explaining
25, hang on, let's just do this. 25, it's been a while since I did this. 170 divided by 25 gives you 6 remainder 20. And so what you have there, it's been so long. 6 remainder 20, which means that you've got 20, 20 over 25 is your remainder. And that is then 4/5, which does simplify to 0.8. So there is that 0.8 there that you need to remember. So the 3/5 one you could do quite easily because like you say, there's no remainder. But the second there is a remainder when you try and divide, you have to account for it. You can't ignore it. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys. So I'm hoping that we all have some answers. I really sincerely hope that didn't distract any of you. If it did, just ignore it. I apologize. Right. Would anyone like to put their hands up to tell me how they got an answer for number 1? Fiona, help me out with number 1. Fiona, you there?
Anna, you must unmute on your side. There's a pop-up, just click on it. Let's make that pop up again. Find a pop-up, Fiona, quickly. Click on it. Does it work? Oh, Fiona, we
Okay,
so
we'll try
sorry.
again in a second. Mavuyo, help me with 1. I'll come back to you, Fiona. Yo, it's nothing working tonight. Mavuyo? Oh no.
What's going on?
Mandisa? Let's try. Just keep trying. Mandisa, can you unmute yourself?
Ma'am,
My voice on.
Mavuyo's not unmuted. Oh gosh. Okay,
ma'am,
Mavuyo?
number 1,
Yeah.
we say 122 divided by 100.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is 1,22.
Perfect. 1,22.
22.
Perfect, guys. The reason it's 1,22, 2 zeros, take your comma and move it 1, 2 back. And so we get 1,22. Okay, Fiona, let's try again. Can you unmute this time? Oh no.
Oh, sorry, Fiona.
Okay, Kagiso,
There we
do you want...
go.
Oh no,
Fiona's
there we
on.
go. Yay.
Hi, Fiona. Fiona, now you can talk to us. Now you have to talk out loud. Ooh, Fiona, we can't hear you.
Oy vey, guys. Technology tonight.
Uh-oh. Sorry, Fiona. We did want to talk to you today. It doesn't look like it's working.
Yeah, it seems like
Les,
the audio is good.
yeah,
Les,
but
help
she
me
could
with
hear
2.
us.
Ma'am, number 2 is 0.73.
Excellent. Okay, so guys, this is 73%, so it's 73 over 100, which means that we've got 73 divided by 100. And so much like we did over here, we will take our decimal 1, 2 places to the left, 0.73. Again, remember that you can always double check your answers with a calculator. And so even though you have to be able to do this without a calculator, there's no harm in checking yourself. with a calculator and making sure that you've done your answer correctly. If you then get a different answer, it means you've gone wrong somewhere, and it means you can go and check your work. So remember, again, try and get your denominator to a multiple of 10, because that will then easily allow you to move your decimal point according to what you need. Alrighty, Fiona, don't stress, we completely understand. Thank you for trying though.